program evaluation and are frequently required in grant applications. And that is true if the funding is from the federal, the state, the city, a private organization, or a foundation. Often logic models are required. And the reason for that, both using them in program evaluation as well as in grant applications, is because it's a visual, relatively simple, though a lot of work goes into it, but the product is a relatively simple visual from, a 10,000-foot view of what it is that is being examined or evaluated or proposed for funding, right? So it covers the resources that an agency or program has. It covers the activities, the inputs, makes some assumptions about the program, which the more explicit you can be about those, the better. We will talk about that in a few minutes. The outcomes, the outputs, and then outcomes, and we'll talk about all these components and a couple of more as we go through this presentation. But a logic model can help answer some key questions, right? And the first key question is, what difference are you making? So if you want to evaluate a program, if you want funding to start a program, you need to demonstrate that a particular change is going to happen. If you're conducting a program evaluation, you're assessing whether a program has achieved some outcome, whether it's meeting the objectives it set forth, right? And in a funding proposal, in a grant proposal, you want to demonstrate that you know what you're trying to do, you know where you're trying to get, and you have a plan to get there. Right? You're going to put the resources, the activities, the skilled staff in place to make sure that those outcomes can be achieved. So how do you know that the program has achieved its outcomes? And again, the logic model, while on this more simple side, can really help lay that out very clearly. And then it helps you determine the value of your program. Okay, so what difference are you making? How do you know that the program or the service is actually the cause of the change or the cause of the difference that you are making? And how can it help you determine the value of your program? A logic model is a graphic illustration of a program, of an event, of an intervention. Importantly, you could think about using a logic model for planning a conference. You could think about using a logic model there's going to be some short-term tutoring for students to prep them for the SAT, right? Think of that as an intervention versus a program, which is usually more ongoing, longer sustained service that's provided, right? But it could just be a short intervention. It could be about the flu, and it's not going to be repeated necessarily, right? You can think of it as something more short-term rather than, a more established sort of service or program. So as I mentioned, it's a good visual, a simplified picture, and it's a response to a given situation. So in the grant application example, you want to enhance the children's after-school program, and here's how you're going to do it. And the logic model lays that out, and these are the outcomes that you can expect, right? So this is a response to the situation. We have more kids than we have resources for, or we've did our pilot program and now we want to expand, okay? So there's some sort of change that is going to happen. It does show the logical relationships among the resources that are invested, the activities that take place, and the benefits or changes that will result. Okay, and we use logic models every day. We're always doing an analysis of, okay, if I put this much time into X, I can expect to have this happen, and it's going to cost me this much, but in the long run, that's worth it. It doesn't matter, whether to join a gym is, a very simple example. So, again, the simplified picture, that's a response to a given situation. It talks about the activities and the benefits or changes that will result. So let's go with a very simple example. A puppy has a headache. So let's think about the situation the resources, the activities, and the results. Okay, so the situation is that the puppy has a headache. The resources are perhaps aspirin, water, rest, and the activities, the puppy will have to take the aspirin, right? The puppy will have to drink the water and then take some rest, get some rest. And the results are that he will feel better and the headache is gone. Okay, so there's your given situation. Here are your resources, the activities that will take place, and the results. Okay, this can, of course, be presented visually. Clearly, that puppy has a headache. Here are some of the resources that you have. And then look how happy that puppy is at the end. So, logic models in the real world, however, slightly more complicated and nowhere near as cute. So, again, used in program evaluation, though not exclusively. In the for-profit world, this originated from Total Quality Management. That's Deming's Total Quality Management, a process-oriented system. And it's built on the belief that quality is a matter of conforming to a customer's requirements. It's built on the belief that quality is a matter of conforming to a customer's requirements. So when we talk about logic model, it's about the outcome is what the customer wants. Okay, and again, this is in the for-profit world. And Total Quality Management really took hold in the United States after it was successful in Japanese firms in the 1950s and 60s, right? And again, it's Deming, D-E-M-I-N-G, is considered one of the founders or the founder of TQM, Total Quality Management. So the idea is that there's excellence at the managerial, operational, administrative levels. It's continuous improvement in all aspects of business. It's understanding that quality improvement results in cost advantages. Quality improvement results in cost advantages and better profit. It involves all personnel. It is intensive relationship with customers and suppliers and building that intensive relationship with customers and suppliers. And it involves market-oriented practices. Okay, so at the time, it really was revolutionary, if you will, to think about being so methodical about quality control. Okay, in the public sector, at the government level, there's the Government Performance and Results Act, GPRA, as it's fondly referred to. When you get a grant from almost any federal agency, particularly if it involves individuals, that if there are individuals who are receiving services, you have to complete a GPRA, which is about reducing waste and inefficiency. It instills accountability. It improves effectiveness and efficiency in government-sponsored programs, or that's its intended objective, right? This is very connected to strategic planning. Logic models are also used in the not-for-profit world by United Way, by the Kellogg Foundation, and internationally by USAID. Again, very common, and logic models can be applied to small, focused programs, a comprehensive initiative, a process such as teams coming together, or, as I mentioned earlier, a single event. And if I may add a note about Total Quality Management, it really fell out of favor. I actually think there's a little bit of a resurgence about TQM happening in the private sector, but it did fall out of favor for quite a while. It's a very intensive process, and workers were complaining that there's too much paperwork and processes involved in achieving total quality management. So why use logic models? You want to portray the underlying rationale of the program or the initiative, and I've given you some sites that if you want more specifics on them, let me know. You can use some of that language and look up the site at the library. It's a plausible model of how a program is supposed to work. It's also very helpful when you work with agencies to really sit down and try to put this into the schematic that we'll get to in a second, because oftentimes people think they're doing things that either they're not doing or they don't do it in the order they think, or so-and-so is supposed to be doing this and I assume they're doing it, but it turns out they're not. So it's a good way to kind of cross-check. Does this make sense to you? Does it make sense to you? Does it make sense to you? And make sure that you have agreement across your team and the agency that you're conducting this evaluation for. Some call this program theory. Carol Weiss's work on program evaluation, she refers to this as program theory or the program's theory of action patent from 1997. The bottom line of logic models is that it enhances program performance through outcome accountability. It can be used as a framework for planning, implementing, and evaluating the links between your investments, your resources, and your results. Some programs work, some programs do not work. Some programs work for some people in some contexts at certain times. The important question related to logic models is helping to answer the question why. They are amongst the first steps of understanding assumptions, practices, objectives, and outcomes. Logic models look at those four components: assumptions, practices, objectives, outcomes, and how they are related to one another, right? So logic models ultimately help a program answer the question why. A review, this has been covered, but different types of evaluation. We have needs or an asset assessment, a process evaluation, outcome evaluation, and impact evaluation. Sorry about my online notification. A needs or an asset assessment, you're looking at the characteristics, the needs, the priorities of the target population. What are potential barriers and facilitators? What is most appropriate to do to meet those needs? The process evaluation is, how is this program implemented? Are the activities delivered as they were intended? If you're developing or putting in a training, if you're training your staff and they're going to implement a particular curriculum, are they doing it correctly? Are they is there fidelity to the model? Is the implementation going as the creators of the curriculum planned, right? One of the biggest problems in what happens out there in the real world is that what was developed usually through careful study and making sure that the different components, each component mattered and had the intended effect, as best that can be figured out ahead of time. You deliver that out into the real world and people decide, oh, I'm not going to do this lesson in the plan. I'm not going to follow this tip or this chapter or this module for substance abuse treatment. We're going to kind of make it, tailor fit it to our program because we have special needs and characteristics, right? That's a problem with fidelity. That is not, you should not expect the same results if you've gone ahead and changed the recipe, if you will, right? This easiest analogy is to cooking. You get the recipe, your mom has made this cake, it's your favorite thing in the world, you're very excited, but you don't have a particular kind of flour, you're going to use sugar instead. Okay, well, you shouldn't expect the same cake. That makes perfect sense, right, when you think about it from a cooking standpoint. The same is true for programs that implement particular curriculum or particular services that come from a training model or training modules, right? Outcome evaluation. What is the desired effect of the program? And are you achieving those effects? Who's it benefiting? Who isn't benefiting? What is working about it? What isn't working about it? To go back to the previous slide, the idea that some programs do work, some don't, some work for some people in certain contexts, etc. It's really that last the last status that is the most common, right? And it's rarely that a program does not work or, oh, this program works perfectly. It's under these conditions with this group of people, this mix of people between clients and staff and administrative folks, the whole nine, this is when it worked, right? And outcome evaluation can help you figure out what those conditions are, but rarely is it just a up or down on whether a program works. So you have to get into the nuance, into some very specific measures about what's happening in the program to really conduct a good outcome evaluation. An impact evaluation, to what extent can the changes be attributed to the program? What are the net effects? What are the final consequences? Is the program worth the resources that it costs? Again, I'm going to talk a little bit in a few minutes about an example from recycling, and cost particularly is not necessarily the metric by which we should be evaluating or assessing whether recycling is a good policy for a city, a town, etc. So a couple of points I should say about program evaluation. There's two general reasons for unsuccessful programs. One is implementation failure, the failure of the program to put the intended activities into operation, and the other is theory failure, that the activities, you thought these activities would bring about desired effects, but they don't, right? So implementation failure is a curriculum example I just gave you a minute ago. And then theory failure is that these certain activities were expected to bring about the results, but actually either they brought out negative results or they didn't matter in terms of the outcome. And again, another note about grant applications usually require a logic model. So the first step in a logic model is to create a situation statement or a goal statement. This is a broad statement of the desired condition of well-being for a particular group. It is usually client-focused. It describes the intended change for your specific population. It's focused and it's to the point. Let's say 2 sentences. Okay, your situation statement or your goal statement. So your goal statement, originating problem or issue, it's set within the complex of socio-political, environmental, economic circumstances. The situation is the beginning point of logic model development. Okay? We're going to talk about more about goal statements, but here are then the broad categories or components for logic models. Inputs, which lead to outputs, which lead to outcomes. There are very specific differences between outputs and outcomes. We will talk about those as well. Think about your inputs as your program investments. What is the drug court bringing to the table, right? They're bringing a judge, they're bringing a district attorney, they're bringing a public defender, they're bringing a probation officer, they're bringing treatment providers, okay? What are the outputs? What are those activities? Well, there's status hearings every week. The DA reviews possible cases. The public defender talks with clients about joining the drug court program instead of, taking probation or jail time. The treatment providers hold counseling sessions. Is it a group session? Are they one-on-one sessions? Is there anything related to education and vocation, or job skills and training and learning how to create a resume and these sorts of things? And then under outputs as well, participation. Who are you going to reach, right? Who's your audience? Who's going to go to those sessions? And then the inputs and outputs lead to outcomes, okay? And we have short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes. And when we think about short-term, then we're talking about learning, okay? This is awareness, it's knowledge, it's attitudes, it's skills, opinions, aspirations, okay? But it's about learning, short-term outcomes. Medium-term outcomes are about action. We're going to change behavior, we're changing practices, we're going to create a decision-making tree or model of how we're handling certain situations. Action can also be about policies, it can be about social action. And long-term outcomes are about conditions. What social, economic, civic, or environmental conditions have been changed by the program or by the services.